Today I have a pretty good one for you. We're going to be talking about typical fears that potential big picture users have. So what happens very often is I get contacted by people that are kind of looking at big picture or other tools, but let's talk about big picture in this video, and they are struggling to see how the tool will actually fit into the scenarios that they have in their heads. And sometimes I'm getting a list of questions and can we do this with this tool? Can we do that? How about this scenario? Is this achievable? So I'm always doing my best to try and answer those questions and actually show on screen what I have in mind while discussing possible solutions. It's not always very easy because sometimes there are several ways you can actually achieve the same thing with the tool. And it's understandable, the tool is quite robust and there is no one way to go about it, although there are some best practices which are okay to follow if it fits your scenario, so to say. So today I'm going to give you 5 typical fears that the users have while thinking about big picture. It's of course not a complete list, because if I would be to compile all of the questions I'm getting, this would definitely be like a several hours video. Also, just on this point, I could actually also talk for several hours discussing all the different types of approaches, but I'm just going to simply focus on the most typical one. And in several cases, I will also do my best to try and present this to you. So without further ado, let's go right into this. But before we do, please remember that this video is part of our effort to deliver high quality training and learning materials for the Atlassian ecosystem. If you want to support that, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and also please remember that we do offer paid service in this area. I mean Atlassian in general, but also project management tools in the Atlassian ecosystem. I think that we are one of the most experienced companies in this area. We have been specifically working with project management tools for several years now. There are almost 100 customers that we've trained or went through with the implementation process. So we have lots of experience in this area, and very often we are getting questions about, the typical use cases for this, all the best practices. This is exactly something that we love sharing with our customers. And I'm pretty sure that very often you will not get this from less experienced partners. And believe me, this knowledge is worth its price. Now, let's talk about the questions. I'll start with the first one, and it's lack of templates automation. And the user here explains that ideally a user can clone configuration and it automatically creates and preserves the structure of project phases and milestones and tasks. So what is the person here really thinking about? The person is thinking about the template that will actually control 2 areas of big picture. So let me show you what I have in mind. The first area is the configuration of the box. If you don't know what the big picture box is, in a very simplistic terms, it's just a bucket for issues essentially. So the configuration of the box is of course a very important step in the implementation process. You want to get the configuration as well as possible, as close to perfection as possible from the start, so that later on you don't have to change the configuration settings for the box types, because some of those settings will influence previously created boxes, some of them will not, and then you will have a lot of manual work to catch up with. So this is definitely something to consider. But what we are talking about over here is the copying of the configuration of the box, which is easily achievable by working around box types, right? So the right configuration again of all of those box types, or different ones if you want to use something else, will be exactly what you're looking for. And the second part of this question is, what about task templates? Can I do task templates? And like when I'm starting a new project, I want to have a bunch of tasks, issues, phases, whatever is needed, epics, subtasks, tasks, user stories inside, which I know that the people will have to create anyway, right? And yes, it's also achievable. Yes, there are several ways of doing this. The very simple one is you can do it straight from the Gantt module, for example, inside the box. So if you go to the Gantt, this one will not show me Gantt because this is a home box, but if I switch to something else, you will have an option over here to clone an existing scope. So you can create a box which has like a scope, like a template scope, and then you can clone this scope of that box into other projects, into new areas of Jira. So that's one of the solutions, but it has its drawbacks, it has its minuses, and it's definitely not perfect for every scenario. Actually, very often this is something that we are actually not using, even though this is the simplest one, simply because it has some important drawbacks. So other options are also on the table, and you can do the import from file, you can do some scripting, and if you want to get this part right, we can always help you out with this as well. The second question that we get very often is, can we create different views of all of my data that reside actually in BigPicture for different areas? So the one I'm looking at right now is business facing, IT facing, and strategic programs, right? So the answer to this is also quite simple, and it's all about understanding how BigPicture is connected to Jira data and how this Jira data is shown in boxes and how it's all connected. So the key over here is to understand that there is a single source of truth, right? And that's Jira. And whenever you create a box, you grab a bunch of Jira data and you put it into the box. Now, the question is, can I get the same set of data that I just put into my box number 1 and put the same set of data into my box number 2? Can I do that? The answer is yes, because BigPicture is simply referencing the data. It's not copying the data, it's simply pointing to the data that resides in Jira. So an additional question to question number 1, so question 1.2 is, what happens if something over here gets changed? Let's say in terms of start and end date. Is it going to affect our box number 1? Or is it going to affect our box number 2? Or is it going to affect both of them? And the answer is that it will affect both. The same thing will happen if you change something in box number 1. It will also reflect the change in box number 2. So that tells you that if you want to achieve something that will resemble structure where you have different views for different purposes, but of the same data or partly the same data, then it is absolutely possible. Let's take a look at this example over here. This is our web apps portfolio. It's just a simple example of a portfolio that holds several projects together, right? And I can of course go and view those projects on the timeline like over here to understand what's going on where, and some of those you can see that are even expandable. They have like program increments. These are actually not aligned properly, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that you can also go to the portfolio level and look at the data from the portfolio perspective, right? So I can look at the data like this from over here. That's a very similar view that I've been checking out before. But also if you switch to the Gantt, you will be able to look at the data from the Gantt perspective as well. Now, is this something that is useful, or is it something that is not useful? So let me show you. I'm going to zoom out and I'm just looking at the whole bunch of data coming from several different projects. And mind you, these are very small projects. These are projects that have like 45, 50 issues inside. This is nothing compared to the projects that we work with on the instances of our customers. But that's just an example, so bear with me. So the big question is, how does this view actually help me in anything? And the answer is, it does if you apply filtering. So if I, for example, let's say that our epics inside the projects are the first big step, first big milestone for everything that is happening inside. So our projects are organized around epics. It doesn't have to be like that. There are, again, different approaches that can be taken over here, but that's the one we took in this example. So it's just an example, remember. So if I apply a filter and I will say, show me just the epics, this is what you get. And this view is already quite interesting, because from this view, I can see what is done, what is currently in progress, what hasn't even been started, how these things are placed in time, right? How are they also connected if you have any dependencies connecting them, right? And you can have dependencies inside the same project, right? That's project number 1, right? And there are 4 epics inside, and I have some dependency within the same project. I can also have dependencies across multiple projects because this epic over here is coming from my project number 2, right? And it's connected with an epic from project number 1. Oh, this dependency is highlighted in gold or orange. What does that mean? That means that this dependency is broken. That also means that I definitely should take a look at that and figure out why is it broken and what can we do about it, right? So you can create different kinds of views that will give you different kinds of information. And again, there is a bunch of best practices around this so that you don't step on the mine and the things don't blow into your face, so to say. Very unpleasant. We've had one surprise like this so far. The customer didn't listen to our best practices. And let's just say that some 10 people didn't enjoy their weekend. All right? Let's just say it like this. Let's switch to the next one. The next one is, we don't want to bring our IT teams into BigPicture. How do we do that, right? That's a typical question that we get very often, and it's completely understandable. So this is where it's coming from. If I have like a team that is, for example, working on their sprints in Jira, like, this area, right? They are doing the sprint planning over here. They have active sprint over here. They are working with reports. This is the area that they know perfectly well. This is the area where they already feel comfortable right now, and they are not really looking to work with another tool, which is fine because BigPicture is a tool that adds like an additional layer of visibility into the data that is coming from Jira anyway. And the tool is designed to be used mostly by project managers, program managers, portfolio managers, team leaders, product owners, people like that. Not IT teams, for example, not development teams, not members of the teams. Of course, we do support those people in getting access to BigPicture and actually using this additional layer of visibility to understand better about their place in a whole grand scheme of things. How does your work fit into everything else? Why is it important? What are the dependencies? This is important to understand, and that's why part of our implementation package is also basic user trainings. These are for us basic users, people that most likely will have read-only access to BigPicture only, but it's still good to actually let them into the tool and explain how they can benefit from it. So that's part 1, right? But what is very important is that BigPicture has some very specific settings that address this specific configuration. And these settings are mostly around sub-boxes in BigPicture. So if you create a project and then you divide those projects into smaller pieces, smaller time boxes. So for example, you might be working with Scaled Agile Framework and then you create program increments, you create iterations. You might be simply working with sprints, right? And under your project, you create a bunch of sprints, right? That follow one another. One way or another, there is a way in BigPicture to connect those with the Jira boards, with Jira sprints, right? So if you do that, there is a synchronization that will be happening both ways. So when the IT teams change something on their side, then immediately this change will be reflected here in BigPicture. And also, if someone in BigPicture changes things over here, reassigns, for example, a task from one sprint to another, it will also have an effect on Jira and immediately be visible on the Jira side as well. So I'm not going to demonstrate it all the way. Let me see if this is a box where I actually have enough data to be able to show that. There is program increment 1 over here, and there is iteration 2. We don't have any tasks in iteration 3, so apparently it will not work here. But this is basically where the data shuffling will take place, and this is where the configuration has to happen. Actually, not on this screen because you also need to see the advanced options. So here, the advanced options over here connected with the time box and synchronization of time boxes to Jira. This is where this magic happens. So again, BigPicture has the tools to support that and it works beautifully. Moving on to the next one. I'm looking at the Gantt and resources, and it looks like it's an individual user assignment everywhere. And we need to be working on team level. How does Big Picture support this? Well, I understand where it's coming from. I fully understand where it's coming from, because if you go to the Gantt view, and it's very tempting to look at the resources from the Gantt module perspective. So if you turn on the resources over here, you will see individuals. Again, not a great project to look at, so let's switch to the demo box. And inside the demo box, you will see that I will actually have a few more people listed over here, like that. And those people will be assigned to some of the tasks somewhere here on the timeline. I don't know exactly where, but if we zoom out, yeah, we can see that some areas are assigned, oh, like over here. There's some data over here, right? So we can see that there are some numbers happening, there are some numbers appearing over here, and you can quickly judge who is overloaded with work, who is not. But that happens on an individual level. That's true, right? And then you might be thinking, oh, Big Picture has resources module. So maybe this is where I'm working with individuals. And the default view over here is based on individuals. So by default, you will see this, and this is again tasks assigned to individuals displayed in a certain way. Oops, that's not what I wanted to click. I wanted to go actually here, right? So let's do this and let's do that. I should have clicked that in a different order. That would have been faster. Anyway, we are just simply adjusting the view over here. There you go, month, right? So this is like a typical view that you will get over here. And again, this can be misleading because many people don't realize that there is a team view available also over here, and then you can work on the level of teams. The second area is that very often when you're working simply on the level of teams and you don't want to go to an individual level, not always, but sometimes it's the case when you're working very close to the agile world. And this takes me to the next point that says, it looks like a waterfall focused tool and we are agile and work with story points. So how does Big Picture help in this area, right? So both of those are a little bit connected, because if you go to the board module, which is specifically designed to help you work in the agile approach, this is where agile planning takes place. And this is where agile execution takes place. Now remember that this can be connected with Jira boards, right? So it may be just a visualization layer, reporting layer, information layer, and the actual work happens on the Jira site only. And those people that do the work don't even have to have access to Big Picture. But it can also be not only the information layer, but you can actually work over here and do the planning through here, which works very nicely, and you can get a lot of interesting information out of it along the way. So working with teams is absolutely possible over here. So you can see that I can collapse all the swim lanes and I have different teams available here, and I can do the planning on the level of each and one of those teams. I can also manage the team's capacities, again, in several different ways. And story points that were mentioned, right? So again, if you look at certain areas of Big Picture, it seems like working with story points doesn't really fit in the tool. Wrong! Story points are very well supported by Big Picture. You just need to know how to configure different views to get those story points into the right view, into the right aggregation modes, and display them where they should be displayed. Even more, Big Picture supports the approach where some of the work is happening in the standard approach with hourly estimates and some of the work is done with story points. I don't fully agree that this is the best approach to take, because I strongly believe personally that if you do this, it beats the purpose of using story points in the first place, because you have to translate them into hours eventually. Then, just do it from the beginning. But if for whatever reasons, and we have customers that work like that and are kind of stuck in this area, if you are forced to do it like this, there is also a solution for you. So don't be afraid to explore. There were going to be 5 points, but I'll actually add one more, which is quite interesting, I think. We are afraid to mess up the existing data by importing it into BigPicture. A very fair point, because especially for those customers that work solely on Jira Cloud instance and don't have the test environment, which happens unfortunately, then you have to be very careful about handling the data on your production environment. And even for the other companies that have test environments, you don't want to mess up your production data as well. So fortunately, because we have those test environments, we can always do the whole implementation process on the test environment first before we move to production. So we get to test everything properly where the tests belong. But you also have to be aware that there are, again, some best practices in this area that should be followed. And mostly those best practices are around the scheduling mode. Two things: scheduling mode and dependencies. So these are the two things that very heavily influence auto scheduling that happens in BigPicture, right? So it's not a fault. The tool is trying to be smart and the tool is trying to be helpful. So that's why if you connect something with a certain dependencies and there are certain modes enabled on the level of those issues will automatically reshuffle to reflect the logic that you're trying to implement by adding dependencies. But what if you have too many dependencies and you don't control it fully? What that happens? Well, sometimes things get moved to a place where you don't want them to be, right? So if that happens, then definitely it's worth considering which scheduling modes will be right for your case over here. When and where you should use those so that you avoid those critical mistakes and, getting the data back to the previous place later on is not actually that easy. And there aren't any great mechanisms that, just with a few clicks allow you to roll back everything that has been rescheduled. So keep that in mind and stay safe working with the tool, because it will definitely influence your mental health, which is always important, right? So hopefully I was able to help you alleviate and get rid of some of the doubts that you have in implementing BigPicture. And one thing that I want to very much emphasize over here. So it struck me last time when I was talking with one of our customers, and again going through a bunch of questions, answering those questions, and then they ask, okay, so it looks like the tool is good for us. How would you how do you typically approach helping out our customers in implementation journey, right? So we say, well, we usually start from the training, and then we help you gather the requirements, configure the system, do all the kinds of changes, test it, and make sure that you're a happy BigPicture user in the end. A very big shortcut. We actually have videos on the channel that explain the implementation process in a lot more detail, right? And then I get a question, okay, so how long is the training? Well, it's minimum 2 days. Like, it's working days. We can of course split it into half days, but in terms of the working time, it's a minimum of 2 days. Yeah, but we already have some knowledge about BigPicture. We have been working with it a little bit here and there, trying things out. So maybe we can squeeze the training into 1 day, for example. Because we already have, I quote, we already have some fundamentals when it comes to BigPicture. And I'm like, look, if you would have the fundamentals, you would not come to me with those questions, because all of those questions are about fundamental knowledge around BigPicture. If you get trained by us, you will not ask those questions. If you get trained by us, you will actually be able to answer a lot more advanced questions than those, because we not only go through typical functionalities and explain how they work, but we actually do share typical use cases and best practices in those areas, right? So then you will know, okay, if I want to be working in a hybrid approach, this is how I need to configure my boxes. This is how I need to enable the sequentiality of those boxes. This is where I turn on the visibility of time boxes, and so on, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is you can implement the tool and start using it without getting trained. That's of course possible, but you should realize that this is not a tool for the most simple, most easy approaches to project management. This tool is quite robust and has lots of alleyways that will either be a pain point on your journey, or if you know how to avoid those areas, or you know how to use those areas to your advantage, they will actually be something that you will be happy about as a big picture user in the future. And the difference lies in getting properly trained and getting help in the implementation process. So if this is something you would like to explore with us, the information is in the description of this video. Feel free to contact us and we will organize an online meeting to talk about your pain points and how we can help you fix them. And of course, if you want to do it with someone else, because maybe you already have a partner, feel also free to do that. We absolutely do not plan to stand in your way. We simply want to help. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll be seeing you in one of the next ones.